Hi everyone, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to go over index investing for the very long term. So you guys saw that it's much more effective to invest in an index and to hold it for the long run. Now, I'm going to go over a few things again so we can refresh and kind of be on the same page with this. Usually a lot of people are going to put their money in a bank, right? So that's you, right? And let's say you have cash, a check, and you want to open a savings account and you're going to put in $100,000, right? Because that's going to be your potential money for possibly the future retirement or at least a holding set of money in terms of paying expenses when you're much older or elderly per se. And we all know that this is a big issue because one, your money is not growing, right? Because let's say that you left your money over many, many years. When you look back, you just have the same amount. You just have $100,000. But the biggest issue is inflation. Because what inflation does is that by every year passing, those dollar amounts are going to lose buying power each year. So it's going to start to come down and then eventually come very sharply over the span of 30 years per se, right? So you will see in 30 years, let's say that you put in $100,000 now, and let's say 30 years later, you look back to that savings account. So it'd be right now it's 2023, right? So that would be 2040, 2050, they'll be like 2063, right? So that by the time it's 2063, you're still going to have $100,000. But here's the big problem. Inflation you will see that, yes, you do have $100,000, but you're going to see that a lot of the values 30 years ago, so let's say today, a lot of the things that costed $100,000 today actually cost in the future, 30 years later, will cost $208,000. That's the big issue. So what are these related items that increase in prices, right? Because what costed $100,000 before now costs $200,000. Not because it became more valuable, it's just because the valuation of the dollar came down. So in order to get back to that value of what you're trading in, because that's what at the end, you guys have to understand currency and that currency is just a tradable conduct, right? If I want to get an iPhone, the one that I have to trade some sort of value. That could be cash, that could be money. But as years pass on, the valuation of an iPhone is going to increase in price, not because it's more valuable, but because the amount of dollars you need to just pay something equivalent to that iPhone value, you need to actually trade more dollars now. Because if everyone has more dollars, then the valuation, right? So the person, think about like if you're a merchant, right? And you're trading in a grocery store per se, you're a merchant in a retail store. And let's say that from what you're trading, you're going to set a price, let's say $100 per product, right? So then the person's going to trade you with that product for dollars, which would be $100. But as years pass on, the price of your goods is going to rise up, right? Not because it's more valuable, but because everyone has access more to cash now. Because that's the problem, because money's being printed more every time that there's a moment of, let's say, a recession or a slow growth in the economy. They have to boost the economy by sometimes, it's not always the best case, but it's usually the case mostly done where they print money. But that's a problem because that depreciates in the long term the dollar. So net in total, when there's more money being printed, the more access everyone has cash. But if everyone has cash, it's a less valuable conduct. Meaning that if I wanted to trade someone $100, why would I want $100 if everyone has it? It's less valuable towards what I'm trading the product with. So let's say that product is, I don't know, like let's say it's some sort of cosmetic product, which is a bit rare to give an example, but I'm trying to figure out something that costs $100 like that. Let's say like a cosmetic product, right? 10 years later, maybe the cosmetic product can rise 33% in price. So 10 years before it costed $100. Now, 10 years later, it would cost $133, so increase by 33%. When it comes to inflation, keep in mind, obviously, as inflation goes up, of course, the person selling you that price, it's not that they're making more money. It's because the entire economy is revolved this way. If that consumer gets money, right? If she or he wants to buy an asset with it, the asset is going to be the same case. It's going to be a little bit more expensive than before, right? Because asset prices go up. In fact, so you guys can understand, when inflation occurs, right, the first thing that rises in a price is actually asset values. And the last thing that rises is wages, right? Employee wages, right? That's why every single time many people have to actually, this didn't exist before, right? But because of the amount of inflation, and the Bretton Woods, remember, this is the great thing that that's why I wanted you guys to understand all that history, because it's going to be so important to understand that based on what we're going to be talking about in the lessons here in the upcoming lessons, because I'm going to keep referring to that, right? And you guys understand that by now. right? That ever since the Bretton Woods, that's excelled the depreciation of the dollar. Nowadays, there's many family households that literally have to work three jobs simultaneously, not because they want to, but because they literally have to sustain the expenses they have, right? Because the expenses are the first thing that valuable goods of assets go up. The producers, per se, the person producing the goods, get to benefit on the inflation because the person's paying them more. Now, but they also have to pay for food and all this type of stuff. But wages come last. That's why many people's expenses, right? Because what your expenses are someone else's asset. If you're paying rent at a house, that's someone else's asset, the person who owns the property. I mean, it's that simple. And they're the ones that are making more money, and inflation, as it goes up, the asset prices go up, right? So when inflation occurs, obviously you're getting paid equivalent towards inflation. But the problem is that inflation, the last thing that rises equivalent towards what people can afford in expenses, are actually people's income if you work as an employee. That's another case if you're an investor and a business owner, because you're actually the other end, right? And that's why these items, right, you have groceries, food, those are the factors that are going to rise in price. The electricity bill, the mortgage bill, the car bill, and yeah, this is the mortgages as well. You see, so by this nature, if you save money, one, you're not increasing your money. Two, the amount of expenses and the amount of total cost per living is going to always rise in price. That does not mean you have more money. It just simply means that in order to pay something that costed one now is going to cost double in the future. So really, you're going to have to make 100% more of the money. This is the biggest problem. You have to now come up with a way in the future when you're not, your whole goal was not to do that. Your whole goal was to probably retire. But now you have to look for work and emergency just to make double, to just make it through for your living expense. And this is the biggest problem everyone faces. And, saving your money under a mattress is not going to help at all. I mean, it just doesn't matter either way. It doesn't matter if you save, you're going to lose that money based on buying power, because everything is going to rise in price. Everything's going to become more expensive than it is in the future. So your cost per living in the future, no matter how much you save right now, is going to be very wasted in the future, right? Because nowadays it's so easy to spend money because of digital that literally you can spend $1 million probably less than an hour or less than 30 minutes because of digital. And even a lot of things that costed $1 million now are going to cost 30 years, $20 million, right? Now, this price adjustment isn't 100% accurate because I can't tell you what the money's going to be exactly in the future. But I'm giving this sort of, let's say, ratio based on the amount the money has depreciated 30 years before. So from 1993 till now, what costed $100,000 back then now costs $208,000, right? In general, in a lot of things. Of course, and now 401ks. 401ks will not help this either. And that's just the fact with that. The reason why is because 401ks are obviously, so for some of you who don't know exactly what a 401k is, a 401k is a fund set up by the pensioner sponsor to invest the person who has the pension, right? And that person's going to invest all the amounts of quantities into securities. The problem with 401ks is, so many people work for a job, right? And one of the benefits that they usually get secure in the job is that usually the employer tells them, okay, if you work for this job, we'll also set up a 401k for you. That way in the future, you'll be able to not worry about trying to get another job to adjust your expenses, right? And this is a pretty fair idea. But the problem is that there's different problems. One is that the only person that can control your funds in terms of investing the funds is not you as the employee, but it's the person. It's actually by law. It's required by law that the pensioner sponsor is required to invest it in an asset. And this is a problem because you don't have control of your money to invest in, right? And you're relying on a person to invest it for you, but that's not the big reason. It's mostly because the person, this isn't the case a lot of the times, but it's quite frequent that sometimes, because it's an organization, an organization has to sustain itself. A lot of the times they're going to invest in things that benefit more their operations than rather the pension of themselves. And second, I'm just saying that this isn't all the case, right? But this is quite frankly some of the times the case because it's a business, an organization. The second problem is usually almost all 401ks are all invested into mutual funds. Usually mutual funds, of course, invest into many different securities. They invest in sometimes stocks or bonds or even mortgage securities. But the problem is that majority of a lot of mutual funds do invest in bonds. And quite relatively, even if they don't invest in bonds, the biggest problem with mutual funds is they don't get a high return. Mutual funds don't really get much of a high return. And that affects you. Why? Because it doesn't matter whether you're investing your money or not. Even if you are investing your money, the biggest enemy you're always going to have, like similar to death, is going to be inflation, right? So if you don't get a return mostly that can, let's say, very surely in margin, right? My margin is that I want to beat inflation 10 times. This is a problem, right? Because you don't know if the mutual fund will really make that return more than that amount that I just said, or even more than that. Sometimes they make less, right? And by the time it happens, of course, in the pension is to make money in the long term. You're gonna obviously have a return of money, right? So if you invested 100,000, you're gonna get more than 100,000. But sometimes, say the cost of living, that's the problem. The cost of living completely eradicated a lot of those returns. So now you have to pay sort of the sacrifice the returns into paying expenses that you need. And that's the problem that many people don't understand, because they don't understand inflation. The other thing too, like, it's so against you. It's such a game against you, and it's a hard game if you're investing into a mutual fund to even get a return. And 30, even if it's a 401k, right? Why? Because the problem is that you're not controlling your money. You can't control, first of all, the amount of money you're going to invest in, right? So if you were very sure on a thing, you can't invest more money. Second, the person's controlling that fund allocation, so you don't know whether that person is funding into an actual valuable asset, or just because it's an asset in terms of diversification. All these sorts of very nonsense mathematical academia sort of approach that they have to just risk. And I understand that with your controlling money, but the problem is that it's not able to increase enough to overbeat inflation per se. The other part is that this is the worst part, is that the majority of all mutual funds and hedge funds charge the highest expense ratio out of any fund. And that's a huge problem. By average, almost every mutual fund, not all mutual funds, but because I don't know, I can't tell you every single mutual fund, but I can give you a general expense ratio that I've seen the most popular mutual funds. But usually majority of mutual funds and hedge funds charge an expense ratio of 20 to 30%, right? So if you made about 100% gain in a year, your gain is going to be reduced by 20 to 30%. So let's say an average there, let's say that you had left about 75%. And that's a huge problem. That's an enormous problem, because that kills your gain. It's not because of that 1 year, right? Because you might be thinking, but 75% to 100% isn't a huge difference. It is a huge difference if it's in the long term. Why? Because of the compounded interest. If you were to calculate some return for over 30 years, and you separate each return by 20 to 30%, the one that is making the full percent without reducing by 20 to 30% is going to completely eradicate the return with the one that's reduced by 20 to 30%. It's just simple math. You can see over 10, because of the point, like a 401k, you're not just going to exit your 401k in 10 years. You're going to be exiting probably in 40 to 50 years, right? And so that's a big problem, right? That's the worst thing about 401ks, and quite frankly, any pension fund, any 401ks, any pension fund, any hedge funds too. Not all hedge funds, because some hedge funds are flexible. I haven't found any, to be quite frank, but all of them generally do, right? And I don't know about you. I don't like a person who's also delegating to another person to control a money that I can't even see in a way. But I understand the concept, because of course people working as an employee aren't going to understand the investment world. So they're going to see a return and they're going to think emotionally on that. I understand that point, because I'm an investor myself. I know many people don't look at the markets this way, but still I'm telling you right up front that just by so many different factors, it's going against you. Like, the odds are so against you into this. And that's why entering into a 401k is not a good option. And also, Social Security is not a good option either. I would say, obviously, a Social Security, let me just give you the fact, and I'll explain my opinion, because my opinion is, let's say, out of the least. But I'll explain to you the fact. Social Security is more in factor of a fund. It's called a Social Security fund, and they just save your money. It's no different from the bank, to be honest. But of course, it's much more, let's say, stable than in the bank, because Social Security is obviously saved by the taxes you pay on any product or service. So that's a good thing, because anything you're paying, you're really paying yourself in the future. But again, it doesn't matter whether it's Social Security, whatever instrument that comes in the future. If you save your money, you're going to lose money, because the buying power in the dollar, any currency is going to depreciate as time goes on. So whatever it costed now as anything is going to cost more in the future. So you're going to have to fork up more cash just to pay something that you could have paid with less amount now. And that's the biggest problem. And that's the problem with anything, whether you're saving. And that's why Social Security is not the best option. And lastly, a pension fund. Well, a pension fund, you guys already know, because I explained in the 401k. A pension fund, really, so you guys can understand, a 401k is just a type of pension in the pension fund, right? But a pension fund does not even work into that, because it's the same case. It's the returns someone controlling money in the returns, that it's not adequate to really see realistically to beat out the returns, and also the expense ratio. So that doesn't work. Now, many of you might be saying, but like, if it didn't work, then how are these funds making money? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, here comes like the part where people are probably not going to like what I'm going to say, but it's a business. It's what it is, and it's a lot of them are. Well, no, I'm not going to go there, but it's a business. The way how mutual funds make money, if you invest money into a pension, into a mutual fund or a pension fund, they're going to charge you a certain expense, right? And so you guys can understand an expense ratio has to do with a management fee and just a fee for a waivance fee, like let's say for just entering into as the fund and for securities, right? But in total, it's the expense ratio. The expense ratio already grabs up all the expenses that you're going to be paying right up front after a certain period of time. Usually it's a year per year expense. The way how mutual funds or any fund makes money, most of all mutual funds, hedge funds, and pension funds, is their expense ratio. It's just that simple. Think about if you're investing $100,000 into one of these funds and the fund made about 50%. That's a really good return. But I'm just giving this a return because it's a simple math. A 50% return. So that's about a $50,000 gain for yourself, right? But because you're not the one investing, and quite frankly, you're not the one who made the money, it was the pension fund, they're going to charge you an expense ratio, and that will be 20%. 20% out of the money that you actually invested in, not the return, but the money that you invested in, right? So if you made a 50% gain, right, and it's a 20%, you're going to be left with about $30,000. But here's the thing, the hedge fund or not all these funds are making that 20%. So the fund does not just have you doing this. Think about, there's millions of people who have 401ks. So this is the way how mutual funds make money. They just charge an expense fee, right? And they're basically collecting all the fees where they're making cash flow. They're making all this cash flow, and they don't have to worry at all with inflation because they're going to reimburse it into investments that are separate from your investments. And they're probably going to get a much more adequate return. And in total, they're sort of like facilitating their own business with that, right? So as time goes on, their earning power is going to increase, and that they don't have that problem with inflation. Right. That's why, because you might be thinking, but like, how are these firms making money? It's because, I mean, it's that simple. And that's what I'm going to talk about. People just don't understand that to make more money, there's no secret to this. There's no secret sauce. There's no secret ingredient. Many people think that to make money, you need to have like some sort of secret ingredient or something that people don't know. That's complete nonsense. That's not the way how it works. It's actually things that you do know, but you don't want to do because they're hard. That's all it is. And what's that? It's working, it's repetition, it's talking to people with uncomfort, it's doing all these things all at once, bringing your sound out there, and you're going to attract things because you're doing what no one else wants to. So if you're the consumer, who are you likely going to go? The person who knows more, and that person will be you, who knows all this stuff, who's giving the results, and that you're going to get more consumers, people paying you, and you start to make more money, right? But the way how these guys make more money is by charging these expense ratios, these management fees. That's why they have millions of dollars of profits from the billions of dollars that they have in assets from people who fund their own firm. So that's how these firms are still alive, right? That's how they make more money. And I understand a lot of those businesses because I'm in the finance world. I know how that world works. Many people don't, but that's because they're not heavily in finance like I am. But it's inevitable for me to understand that stuff because I work with investments. I know what the other guy's doing. I know the game there. So that's what goes on. And that's why none of these options are going to be the best thing or the surest way to secure your wealth.